Good morning. We are ready. We are live in 5 seconds. Good morning to all who are here at the Baldry Center for Philanthropy on the campus of Southern University and A&M College, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I thank you all for being here today. We have an awesome, fabulous, fantastic philanthropic speaker today who is the second in our series for the fall semester 2023. We want to thank everybody who has registered and who are here with us in person, and those of you who are watching us live, YouTube or Facebook. We greet you and thank you very much for being in attendance. So, knowing that your time is very, very valuable, I will bring up now Mr. Alfred E. Harrell III, CEO of the Southern University System Foundation.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Terry, for all the hard work you do in support of the center. We are absolutely delighted today to have Amir Pasic with us to share some thoughts around philanthropy. I don't want to take for granted that many of you know how the center came to be and came to an existence. About 10 years ago, we met with the then president, Ron Mason, and identified a need to educate our community on how philanthropy really works. And we thought about a number of approaches to doing that. And we had a wonderful opportunity to connect with the Kellogg Foundation, who supported a study to develop a plan and our program model to meet that need. So we did that, and in 2019, we opened up this center, the first center for philanthropy at any historically Black institution. And so we're really excited about it. We're thankful and grateful for our benefactors, Leon Baldry, Warren Baldry, and the late Virginia Baldry for making this possible. I'm going to introduce our speaker for this morning. Amir Pasic is the Eugene R. Tempel Dean of the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, the world's first school devoted to research and teaching about philanthropy. Prior to joining the school, Pasic was vice president of the international operations at the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, also known as CASE, a global professional association serving educational institutions and their advancement professionals. Previously, Amir was Associate Dean for Development and Strategic Planning at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, as well as Executive Director of its Foreign Policy Institute, where he continues to serve as a fellow. Amir served as Deputy Director of the World Security Project at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and is Deputy Vice President for Advancement at the George Washington University. A former librarian at the Library of Congress, he began his career with faculty appointments at Brown University. Amir earned his doctorate in political science at the University of Pennsylvania. He holds a master's degree in international relations from Johns Hopkins University and a bachelor's degree in economics and political science from Yale University. Help me in welcoming Amir Pasic.
Well, thank you so much, Al. It's a true privilege to be here, and I really appreciate the wonderful hospitality from you and all of your staff. Turn this one off. There we go. Great. Thank you very much. So I really appreciate the wonderful hospitality and the warm welcome. My first trip here to Baton Rouge, and I really appreciate more than anything just the the commitment to philanthropy and the curiosity about philanthropy. So I do really appreciate the vision that Al summarized and the vision of the Valdry family to create the first institute on philanthropy at a historically Black institution. So I love the connection between the first school of philanthropy in the world and the first institute at a historically Black institute. And hopefully we're just beginning to see the potential of the collaboration, the potential of the collaboration there. So as in any field, once you start a field, you start seeing the whole world through the lenses of the field that you have begun. So if you're an economist, you see people exchanging everywhere, everything from the family to what's happening at the global stage. Similarly, if you're a lawyer, you see the law operating everywhere. So similarly with philanthropy, once you look at philanthropy, and people who are outside of the world of philanthropy think that philanthropy is kind of a small thing that happens around Christmas time maybe, or in church sometimes. It's something that happens there on the side. But when you study philanthropy, all of a sudden you see the whole world through the lens of philanthropy, and you start seeing all the things that wouldn't be there were it not for philanthropy, including this beautiful building, the way we help each other, the way philanthropy greases even the most kind of hard negotiations, how there's friendships and trust and smiling that is really important to make the world that we build possible. So sometimes we often think that civilization is built through commerce or through the law or through technology, but there's a lot of barn raising that has built the world around us that we often don't look at enough. And so I really appreciate the curiosity that we all share about how we can see the world differently and how we can do philanthropy better when we look at it through the lens of curiosity about philanthropy. So today I want to join you on a journey about research and data in philanthropy, because as you know, what counts matters and what matters counts. So if we don't have data, we're just, as Sherman was saying, we're just sharing opinions about what we think philanthropy does in the world. But to get an understanding of how philanthropy makes a difference, it's important to have data and it's important to have research. So I'm going to give you a lot of research about philanthropy, much of it done at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. That's by no means all of the research that's out there, but it's because of the role that I play, the research that I know the best. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of all of the research areas that are there, but hopefully it'll spur your interest and your curiosity. And we can come back to some of the slides that I'm going to go through rather quickly. So our agenda for today is to start a look at the state of giving in America. Where does the money come from? Where does it go? There is an important development in the decline in household giving in our country that I want to touch on as well. And then we'll look at the role of the wealthy. The wealthy are increasingly important in sustaining philanthropy in our country. And then we're going to look at diverse donors, the importance of our increasingly diverse society and what that means for the donor pool that we want to encourage, and the deep history that we have often not paid enough attention to. And then let's look at some of the different ways there are in terms of ways of giving that are emerging, and then look at some of the future issues and possibilities in terms of philanthropy as we go forward. And then as we conclude, we'll come back to thinking about kind of what are the most important things for the future and how each of you can play a role. So let me start by asking all of you, how many of you are philanthropists? Well, this is a well-studied audience. We all know that we are all philanthropists just by the virtue of being human beings. So I have a very sophisticated audience here, so I can go even faster than I had attempted to go. Yeah. So at the foundation of our curriculum at the undergraduate level at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy is a philanthropic autobiography that every freshman starts to talk about the history of their life and who helped them and how they have helped people. And then when they become seniors, they revisit their philanthropic biography to think on the reflections of what they have learned about philanthropy for themselves as an individual and how it plays a role in society around them. So the state of giving in America, how do we know about the state of giving in America? It is through a study called Giving USA that comes out every June that measures giving in the United States. It's been around since 1956, and we have been doing research for this for this study for some time. And many folks who are not as sophisticated as you see in the newspapers a lot of news about foundations and corporations, thinking that that's where most money comes from. But as you see from this slide, it is individuals that account for the largest proportion of giving in the United States. And you'll see that last year there was almost $500 billion in the United States given to philanthropy. So now, if you look at the last 10 years, you see that something happened last year and that giving went down for the first time. And it's interesting to put it in context because giving during the pandemic really responded to needs. And so we had over $500 billion given in 2021 before we saw the decrease going down. And of course, everybody in the field gets quite concerned when we see a decline in giving in the United States. And so we want to know, why is it that we had a decline last year? And what the researchers say, it's the economic challenges that we had. The Standard & Poor's 500, the stock market went down, and then the other big news is inflation. So I think that most of you in this audience probably don't remember when inflation was as high as it has been over the last several years, because it's been 40 years since we had that phenomenon. Some of the bright spots was that the gross domestic product did grow, and employment was pretty low as well. So there are some kind of positive developments as well, but there was severe economic challenges that affected giving. You'll see here kind of a very robust correlation between the stock market and giving. So especially toward the end of the year, when you see the stock market in the last quarter is correlated quite closely to whether giving will go up or will go down. Now, 40 years ago, the pie that I just showed you was quite different, and the biggest difference was on foundations. So foundations have grown quite a bit. The role of individuals has correspondingly gone down a little bit more. And that speaks to a theme that will be coming up in terms of the concentration of wealth in our country. Some of you may wonder, be interested, especially given the importance of corporations to Southern's fundraising portfolio. Typically, corporations, there's a robust pattern, spend about somewhere around 1%, not quite, of their pre-tax profits on philanthropy. So that's always an interesting kind of robust continuity that takes place. Where does the money go? So this is the other side of the state of giving and philanthropy. Where does it go? The major destination is religion, followed by human services, and you will see all the other areas where it goes. The newest categories are international and arts and environment. 30 years ago, they were too small to measure. So those have been growing areas in giving. And the giving to individuals is primarily gifts in kind in terms of pharmaceuticals from pharmaceutical companies. You will see that even areas that grew nominally last year were pressured by inflation. But if you look over 2 years, you see that there's slightly a more positive story to be told, because you saw that in 2020 and 21 we had quite remarkable giving as well. You'll see that the two categories that managed to be larger than inflation are giving to foundations and international affairs. So that gives you a picture of the origins and the destinations of giving in the United States at the very broad level. I sometimes refer to Giving USA as the GDP of giving, and it's really important to understand the context, regardless of what role you play in the philanthropic space. These are the results of a study we did with the help of the Hewlett Foundation about the way Americans perceive philanthropy. So you will see that even though trust levels are quite low, even for nonprofits, the nonprofit sector by the American public is held in quite positive esteem compared to all the different areas. Colleges, governments, judiciaries, the executive branch are quite low. And as you've probably seen through other studies, trust in institutions in our country is declining, but the nonprofit and philanthropic sector are still quite positive. So that's encouraging to see. Again, the public at large does not see themselves as philanthropic, even though many of them do participate in the world of philanthropy. And you'll see here the categories of philanthropy that we try to think about in terms of giving time, treasure, talent, ties, and testimony. So a very expansive understanding of philanthropy. And you see 60% people give to charity, even though only 20% of themselves consider themselves as philanthropists. They don't see themselves in that category. The word itself, philanthropy, is often associated with privilege, people who are somehow outside and have huge amounts to distribute. It's kind of not always a word that describes people's own experiences of giving and generosity. So hopefully that gives you a sense of kind of the state of giving currently at a very broad level. Now let's talk about declines in household giving. This has been determined by another study that we do called the Philanthropy Panel Study that goes back to the War on Poverty. There was a big study that was started to look at income dynamics in the American population, and over the last 20 years, we've been adding questions about giving and volunteering. And this is one of our foundational studies that is very important to everything else we do, because it looks at intergenerational dynamics, asking questions about what are the connections among generations? How does parents' behavior affect children? How does it differ based on birthplace, race, and what are the volunteering patterns that take place? From that, we know that 50% of Americans give. We have a sense of what the average gift is for households across the country based on our total population. This is perhaps the most important figure that is worrying a lot of people about our civic sector as well. You will see that since 2000, we have lost about 16% of households to giving. We used to say that more Americans gave than voted. We thought that giving was one of the key fundamental civic gestures that Americans made about building our common society. But as you'll see now, and given in our polarized times, many more people, especially in presidential elections, are voting than they are giving. And we'll talk a little bit about a generosity commission that was formed to start a national conversation about what does this decline in giving mean, not only for nonprofits that have to struggle, but also for the quality of our democracy more broadly. So some of the implications of these changes are, I think, as many of you are experiencing in the nonprofit world, participation rates are going down, and you have to rely more on a smaller number of wealthy donors as well. Data obviously matters. This gives you a sense of the religious, secular, and overall giving. You'll see that it's going down. All three of those top lines are going down, even as our population grows. So why is there this change in giving? 40% of the decline is accounted for by economic factors. The fact that after the Great Recession in 2008, people had loans, their economic circumstances declined. But the rest of the decline is accounted for by the decline in religious affiliation. There's a very strong connection between religious affiliation and giving, not only to faith-based organizations, but to all organizations as well. And then there's been demographic shifts. We started talking before the event about different attitudes among young folks, and they are marrying at a later date, they're forming households at a later date, and so those kind of different patterns are also closely related to giving as well. And then there's the more ambiguous issue of technology. Now that so much giving is mediated by technology, some of that giving is not as transparent to usual research methods because it happens on proprietary platforms. So people giving on Facebook, on GoFundMe, those are often peer-to-peer giving that don't get measured in the same way. So we're not quite sure. That's kind of a caveat that maybe giving is not going down as much as we had worried. You see the giving by age. You'll see that the older folks like me, who the kind of giving pattern kind of still stays pretty robust, but the other age cohorts are going down. So that's something to also worry about more as we go into the future. A resource for you is called Generosity for Life. It takes the Philanthropy Panel Study and puts it in a dynamic platform so you can see how giving differs in America based on region, based on whether you went to college, based on your gender difference as well. And so the other thing you can do is go and see Give-O-Meter. So that's something you can personally go and see based on your income, your educational level, your location, and your giving, how do you compare to people in that same category? And you can go and look at that, and that's something that might be of interest to you, but it's also, if you're a fundraiser, it's something you can sit down with your donor and giving them a sense of where their giving fits in terms of people who are similarly situated in the country as well. So we've seen kind of some picture of giving in the United States, and then we've also seen the decline in giving, the larger reliance of wealthy folks. We're increasingly focused on affluent families. So what do we know about the patterns of wealthy families as nonprofits increasingly rely on nonprofits to kind of make ends meet? This study is something that we do every 2 years with the Bank of America. We survey not high net worth individuals, so affluent families who have incomes over $200,000 and assets of $1 million outside of their home. So these aren't the 1%ers. These are kind of the 5% affluent families in the country. So this is the bottom line result, is that affluent families, the red line, they give almost 10 times as much as the regular population. So you will see that their giving is much higher than the general population. And they continue to take more of the burden of giving. The good news of the most recent study is that volunteering among the wealthy population is rebounding since the pandemic. So that's a good sign, because giving is often correlated with engagement. So the more there is volunteer engagement, the more giving there will be. Wealthy individuals also use a range of vehicles for their giving. As you will see, everything from wills to donor advised funds that are more complex and more sophisticated than your general population as well. So that is important to track and know as well. Let me move to the fact that they're also focused on religious giving as their primary, the most common way where their funding goes. And there's also an important difference between older and younger people, and that's very important for the future of giving. You will see that there's a decline, a lesser vigor in terms of younger folks than the older folks in terms of where they give to. And this slide shows you that issues like climate change are more important to younger folks, whereas issues like faith and health are more important to older folks as well. You will see some of the difference between younger and second generations as well, and the importance of values to younger folks as well. The younger folks express that they want their values to be much more connected to what they're giving to as well, whereas sometimes the older folks are just more focused on giving back to their community without kind of being as deliberate about what their values are in terms of where their funding goes. One of the things I think to take away from the most recent study is the opportunity to better engage families. So as you all know, wealth is often transferred and maintained within families, and only 20% of affluent families, affluent households actually engage their families in their giving decisions. So that's an opportunity for growth if you are a fundraiser, is really to engage families much more robustly in soliciting wealthy individuals. So there are important differences in terms of the way wealthy families approach giving. That is important to understand, since more nonprofits are really depending on them to make ends meet, because the overall population giving is declining. Let's look at diverse donors. So I think a few years ago, you welcomed my colleague Tyrone Freeman, who wrote this amazing book about Madame C.J. Walker as a vehicle for reviving the deep and important history of philanthropy in the African-American community, especially among women. And we were very pleased that he got the Dan David Prize for his book, which is the biggest history prize in the world as well. And Tyrone has this wonderful wonderful way of saying that diverse donors are not emerging donors. They've been there all along from the very beginning, even preceding the formation of our republic. It's just that we haven't been studying them, and we haven't been telling the story as robustly as well. So we have a resource that focuses specifically on diverse donors called the Mays Family Institute on Diverse Philanthropy, and we see a deep desire from mainstream organizations, but also from diverse organizations to better understand the techniques of fundraising, but also how to deal with the wonderfully diversifying pool of donors that is coming into more and more wealth. So we are training both in the athletic space with corporations, with the UNCF. We see a deep interest across the field in terms of really understanding and lifting up the stories of diverse donors. We've done some research on everyday donors of color with the Gates Foundation. There's an update of this research that I'll just tell you very briefly about that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks, and obviously we will share that with you as well. So some of the key findings are that there's a robust vigor in terms of giving by donors of color. One of the things that becomes more emphasized is issues of mutual help, of helping out within the community, of individual to individual engagement, the robust role of faith. And technology is being also adopted as well. One of the interesting issues was also that African American donors were taking the lead in terms of racial and social justice giving, and this slide really emphasizes that, and also you'll see that overall, especially after the murder of George Floyd and other African Americans, that we had an increase in racial and social justice giving as well. We also compared that to technologically driven funding like crowdfunding, and then looked at different ways of giving across different kind of backgrounds, everything from giving funding to giving crowdfunding to giving via social media to donating blood that you can look at your own leisure, mutual aid as well. The implications are that generosity spans all differences across our wonderfully diverse population, and in the wake of the pandemic, we saw the power of mutual assistance, the notion that philanthropy is something that is shared rather than that's given from somebody who is in a position of privilege to somebody who is less privileged. It's much more of a mutual notion, and technology was used, especially during the pandemic, to kind of bring people together as well. One of the more recent studies we had was also on Latinx philanthropy. We are looking at all dimensions of diversity as well. And though we saw that formal giving is lower among the Latinx community, we saw that in terms of the findings, the major implications was that family and community are very important for the Latinx community. And there was some interesting differences in terms of how long the Latinx community has been here, immigrants versus longstanding members of that community in terms of how their giving played a difference. And we also discovered that the term Latinx, even though it's kind of a nice umbrella term that covers a lot of differentiation, it's not often the word that's used by the communities themselves to refer to themselves as well. In terms of other research on diverse donors, we have just started the Equitable Giving Lab, which focuses on 4 different indices to see how money flows to 4 different diverse communities. We started with the Women's and Girls Giving Index, and then we have one for LGBTQ communities, BIPOC-led organizations, and military veterans. It's funded by Google, and it builds on the Women's and Girls Index to see how much money goes to women's and girls' causes, and you will see that's only about 2% of all giving goes to women's and girls' causes, and we do this annually or biannually just to see how much funding is going to support women's and girls' causes. And this is really interesting because women are increasingly playing a leadership role in philanthropy. They're becoming more in control of wealth. Women, everything else being constant, tend to give more, and they tend to give in different ways. Women overall tend to be more social in their giving. So you see a lot of giving circles expanding around the country, and you see women are often at the core of those giving circles as well. So we have used that methodology also to look at LGBTQ organizations. Where are they? What are they like? We have seen that they are really growing rapidly. They are usually smaller in terms of revenue and expense than the rest of the nonprofit sector, and they're everywhere in 50 states. And they're all all over our communities. Tend to focus on civil rights as the things that they're interested in. And there's a resource for you if you're interested that you can find organizations, learn more about them through this index process as well. Another important diverse community is the Muslim community, and we have a dynamic Muslim philanthropy initiative. You may know that the Muslim community is one of the most diverse communities in the United States, comes from all ethnicities, and all kinds of different patterns. It's also very young, and it's growing quite rapidly. There is a kind of a duty in the Islamic tradition of zakat, of giving 2.5% of your wealth. But you'll see that giving in the United States by Muslims it does not only go to faith, it also goes to non-faith organizations as well. Women, again, in Islam also play an outsized role in terms of participation and in terms of joining organizations and being part of the society as well. So that's a sense of the variety of different kinds of donors that are getting more attention and more specific understanding of their cultural context and where they fit in the American tapestry as well. So you have those indices. So there's a lot of emerging diversity in the donor pool, and more resources coming up in terms of research to better understand those things. So emerging ways of giving, there are also new ways of giving that are emerging, and we've done some work on Data for Good, looking at how do different habits emerge around the world, because obviously the technology that we have available is not limited only to our country. Online giving, crowdfunding, and social media-enabled giving is available in different countries. And so we've partnered with a variety of intermediaries to look at different ways that giving is emerging in different countries as well. And we've come up with some kind of general patterns there as well, and you can see different country summaries if you go on our website. And of course, all of this research is free and open to all. Donor advised funds is probably something you have all heard about. About 10% of giving now goes through donor advised funds. They range from the biggest charities in the country right now that absorb the largest amounts of charitable dollars, like Fidelity Charitable or Vanguard. They're now bigger than the very big Salvation Armies or the United Ways in terms of how much money they bring in. And they've kind of changed the landscape of how people relate to donors if their funding goes through donor advised funds. And of course, we want to do research on that. As you know, there's often controversy that is motivated by a lot of opinion in terms of what's happening with donor advised funds. So we've been working with a lot of donor advised funds to try to put their giving in the usual categories of Giving USA, so we have better insight into, are they really warehouses where people are just storing money and it's not going to the sector, or are they actually unleashing more and more money to go into the nonprofit sector? So this is a picture of where donor advised funding goes to, and it's a little bit different than the Giving USA distribution, because religion is not the top destination. It is education. Education takes the top as well, but all the other categories are relatively, similar to what happens with the general population. But as we saw earlier, there are important differences between higher wealth folks and the general population. Primarily, if you want to summarize it, the switching of the religion and education priorities. So we also looked at how responsive donor advised funds were to the pandemic and the racial reckoning that we have, and you see that there was good responsiveness. Public society benefit organizations are your United Ways, your United Jewish Appeals, and think tanks, things that are connected to public policy as well. You will see we also did some research on the consistency of donor advised giving before the pandemic. It kind of tracks quite consistently. And one of the most interesting findings is that depending on the kind of donor advised fund you'll have different patterns of giving. So the national donor advised funds are your Fidelities, your Schwabs, your Vanguards, and then you have community foundations that also have donor advised funds, and then you have special, often faith-based donor advised funds that bring together people of a particular faith to serve their giving needs. And this is really interesting from a community-based perspective, is that a very large majority of community foundation donor advised funding stays within the communities that they serve, which is nice to confirm that is actually the purpose of community foundations, is to serve their locality, and indeed that's where their donations stay. So let's turn a little bit to the future. What are the things that we should be looking at in terms of trends? So we have concentrations of giving and receiving. So we saw that the decline of household giving, but also if you look at the overall pie, tends to go to very, very large organizations. And there's emerging a kind of a situation of the haves and have-nots. So as you have probably seen even in the commercial sector, that we have a number of very large companies that account for a good part of the stock market value. Something similar is happening in the nonprofit sector. And then you have the multiplicity of different kinds of organizations, hybrid organizations, and organizational innovations. You have B corporations that are actually corporations, but whose bottom line is also partially to have a social impact. You have donors like Mark Zuckerberg, like Powell's Jobs, putting their charitable dollars into limited liability corporations rather than foundations, because it allows them to do different things, have more flexibility. And you also have the emergence of impact investing, where people use the financial vehicle to try to create social good. So they will invest in companies perhaps that are focusing on employing formerly incarcerated employees, or that are focused on climate change, saying that can they use a private sector mechanism to receive social good outcomes as well. And then there's the issue of policy. So I have mentioned the Generosity Commission. The Generosity Commission will be issuing its report in February, looking at what are the implications of the decline in household giving. Does that mean that we should change payout rates for foundations? Should we change how we regulate nonprofits? The last time we had a commission like this, the Filer Commission, at the end of the 1960s, that led to our current policy regime, there was a big commission that recommended that there should be a White House office that oversees nonprofits, because at the national level, nonprofits are overseen by state attorneys general. At the state level, they're overseen by state attorneys general. At the national level, they're overseen by the IRS, whose major role is to collect tax revenue. And often, they don't understand how their mission of actually collecting revenue has to do with overseeing nonprofits as well. So there was a recommendation to create a new regulatory structure, a White House office for nonprofits. So something similar like that may have happened. So if you're worried about what in the environment could change, clearly things can change in the policy realm. The Trump tax reform, for example, changed radically how many people filed or claimed tax deductions on their taxes. It expanded the number of people who just use the standard tax deduction. So the number of people who take advantage of tax deductions on their taxes has shrunk significantly since those tax reforms. Plus, the policy regime could change if Congress ever did anything about it, and you have to worry about where would they be getting their information about positive changes in terms of policy. The international context, let me briefly talk about that a little bit. We've done some interesting research on that. Obviously, philanthropy is global. We have tracked how much philanthropy goes from wealthy nations to developing countries. We call it the Global Philanthropy Tracker. And you see here in the context of all the flows across borders where philanthropy sits. It is a pretty big number, but it is dwarfed by remittances, so people sending home money as workers to their family, and official development assistance. The interesting thing about the United States is that philanthropy is larger than official development assistance. So the American philanthropic sector gives more money abroad than our government does. And so you'll see that top charitable causes differ across different countries. You see the top recipient regions in the world as well. And we're working to continue to improve the data in this area. And there are probably interesting policy implications all over the world. There's a second philanthropy international study that we do looking at the conditions of philanthropy around the world. And we look at taxes and cultures and other measures to come up with a ranking of how conducive different countries are for philanthropy. Obviously, the United States and Western Europe rank very highly. But what's the point of doing this, other than kind of doing a ranking, is really to highlight kind of the role that philanthropy plays in different countries. And we see the global challenges of the shrinking of civil society in many countries where nonprofits are seen as being quite as challenging government authority. And we see issues with constraining philanthropy at a time when we're trying to achieve these sustainable development goals for the globe that is quite problematic. Technology obviously plays a big role. Mobile devices are now the primary way people find and engage with organizations, and then artificial intelligence is upending many things, including philanthropy going forward. There's kind of the practical way in which philanthropy can take advantage of AI, like every other knowledge industry. But there's also this vision that people like Sam Altman of OpenAI have, that AI will make work a much smaller part of the human existence, and that when work becomes much, much less for most of us, that we will find dignity and fulfillment in life by engaging in philanthropic pursuits. So kind of the founder of OpenAI sees like a future where we'll be spending much, much more of our time engaging in those meaningful ways of helping each other, building community, rather than the work that we do on a daily basis that, in his view, AI will take care of. So in conclusion, let me try to sum all this up. And when I think about the important role of synthesizing knowledge, I often think of the former legendary CEO of American Express, Ken Chenault. He used to say that leadership is very simple for him. He relied on Napoleon to say that, what is leadership about at the end of the day? It is really about defining reality and giving hope. Well, to define reality, you really need to kind of synthesize a lot of information and provide a sense of, what description of the world is going to help your team and your community move forward. So you define reality and you give hope. So those two things are just really important for moving forward. That's why I gave you kind of a nice, hopefully, overview of all of the things that are happening in philanthropy and where they potentially could be going. So I think it's always important to, when you look at trends, not to think that these are things that are impervious to your own action, and that there's a opportunity for each one of us to be a philanthropist, not only in terms of what we can give and what we can say and our time to give, but also in shaping the environment with which philanthropy takes place. And so I'll leave you with 5 really, I think, interesting books. Marcel Mauss wrote one of the first tracts of anthropology talking about gifts. Simple tribal societies before we lived in cities were all centered around gift giving and the reciprocity that comes from gifts. And typically, the story of modern social science and public policy is that way of engaging with each other is something in the past of our kind of pre-civilized past. But I think we oversimplify that. There really is a lot of gift giving and mutual aid and reciprocity that continues to be part of our world. Rob Reich Stanford political scientist, a brilliant scholar, talks about just giving and asks about, in a democratic society, who decided that all of a sudden we're going to have these foundations or even very wealthy people having an outsized influence on shaping our public space? Who elected the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Gates Foundation to make big moves in terms of the way we're educated or the way we attack climate change? And he suggests that there is one possible legitimate answers, and that is that they experiment and they take the kind of risks that our political and our economic space cannot do. How many of you are familiar with Anand Giridhara's Winners Take All? As a big bestseller, kind of criticizing the whole culture around very rich people going to forums and making big decisions about how the world should be for the rest of us without asking us. And he's a very fluid writer. Decolonizing Wealth. This is another book that has taken off and inspired a lot of our students as well, looking not only on the way money is given, but the way money has been generated, and that we need to look at some of those issues as well. And we have seen people responding to that in terms of rethinking about how we compose our boards. Is it always to put just the wealthiest people we can find to put on our boards, or should they be more reflective of our community? And then you're seeing institutions, including large universities, looking at their historical the historical role they have played in injustice and trying to correct for some of those in terms of decolonizing wealth. And then Darren Walker, the current president of the Ford Foundation, questioning whether generosity is enough, or does it really need to lead to justice in some more fundamental way, often relying on some of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, that generosity is not enough. You need justice. You need kind of systematic change beyond simply being generous as well. So those are some of the things I wanted to share with you in terms of broad trends, and then some techniques and some writers who help, I think, synthesize some of those trends and help one decide what is it that we individually in a community can do to face the frontiers of philanthropy. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Pasic. I'm here with the open mic. So is anyone here that would like to ask some questions? I know that was a lot of information and some statistics. So as the last slide said, what does philanthropy mean to you? To me, as stated, giving of my time and my talents. But what I really liked that I heard was about your testimony, or a testimony that hit you to want to support what you heard from someone. Miss Walker, Miss Mitchell, you have you attended the last event with us, and I know something's stirring you. Your eyes are going around like, which question do I ask at this moment? So take a stab at it.
Good morning. I work at Southern University Law Center.
Okay.
So we're that second level of education. And I know my supervisor has sometimes said that when you get to that second level, people they're more interested in helping the first level. Can you give us some idea about where a school like ours would maybe look for or work to get more funds?
Yeah, so typically, the affinity at your undergraduate school is deeper, right? Because that's where you meet friends, you might meet your spouse. This is where you go from being a teenager to being an adult. Those are very formative, deep experiences, and so that connection is usually deeper, and you see that in statistics of giving, right? Smaller universities, small liberal arts colleges, some of them will have alumni participation rates at the 50% level, whereas it's unusual at a professional school to see alumni participation rate even get to two figures. It's hard, sometimes you don't even get to 10%. But there are outliers, I think, especially if you have lawyers who are kind of committed passionately to something, and you create the community within the law school that allows them to kind of realize that second level of passion in their life. I think you can create those affinities. They probably begin through the student experience, like all affinities do. It's just to start paying attention to students, create wonderful experiences for them, but also educate them on the role that philanthropy is playing in enabling their education as well, right? So there are donors and living and dead who are enabling their education. And so not only making that visible in terms of their everyday life, but also connecting them to the donors as well. Those are important personal connections. If the donors or their families make those connections between current professional students and the donors, which also can help with kind of professional development ideas as well. So I think the idea is that in a professional school, you come to class, you get your skills, you may have family already, you're busy, you're not in that kind of immersive transformational mode, but there has to be a passion in your profession as well. So that kind of tapping into that passionate side of why somebody is going into the profession can build those deeper relationships rather than making it a transactional arrangement where, I've paid my tuition, I got my skills, thank you very much, and I'm going to go hang out with my alma mater where I'm still going to football games and my undergraduate alma mater. So it's more of a lift, but with creativity and engagement, I think good progress can be made. And many lawyers, and I'm going on too much because I don't know enough about law, but lawyers are officers of the court. There is something intrinsically public about their profession, right? So tapping into that and how the school kind of walks alongside them in terms of being guardians of the rule of law as well, and making sure that they give back to the school to kind of continue the noble profession that they have become a part of. So.
Okay, I actually have two questions.
Sure.
Okay, the first one is related to the data on philanthropic giving, especially among minority groups. And that is, does that data take into consideration philanthropic giving, and I don't know if you even call it philanthropic giving, but providing support to family and friends? For example, if I've got a relative that's attending a university and they need assistance in going to school, or even a friend who needs that kind of support, does it account for that, or make an attempt to account for that? And the second one is, can you provide some additional information around the involvement of relatives in the philanthropic giving? I heard you mention that, but I wasn't
Sure.
clear on exactly what
Yeah,
you
we
said.
went through a lot of things. So yeah, in terms of minority populations, there's the formal giving. So when we measure Giving USA, we look at financial philanthropy going to 501c3s. That's kind of, but there's a lot of other giving that takes place. And what we found there is that when you control for income, most diverse donors give the same as white donors. They're just as generous when you control for income, right? Because income makes a difference. And then I showed some of the slides in terms of giving to relatives as well. And those are differences among different communities. And those, you can't look at tax returns or administrative data for that. You have to survey people. And typically among diverse populations, African Americans and Latinos, you see family playing a bigger role. Family and church and faith plays a bigger role. So those are, we do look at those things, and there's a kind of an update coming up in a couple of weeks that will look at those a little bit more. Your second question was about involving relatives. Yeah, so what we have seen through the philanthropy panel study, from the most recent Bank of America study, we see that it's underutilized. Only about 20% of people actually engage relatives, whether it's a younger or older generation. Some of the interesting things we found in terms of intergenerational dynamics is that you would think that if you modeled certain behavior, like if you were really interested in the arts, and you model that for your kids, and they would then become interested in the arts. And actually, we found that the talking is more important than the demonstration. So we found that parents and grandparents who talked about philanthropy had a bigger influence on kids and even grandkids than people who had the demonstration. So it's kind of the contrary to the, don't do as I say, but do as I do kind of thing. So we found some of those interesting dynamics that happened there as well. And then we had a very interesting research presentation. For those of you who are interested, every Tuesday at noon Eastern time, we have a philanthropy research workshop, which brings in an interesting researcher to talk 20 minutes and then have an interaction about their research. This fellow was actually a former financial advisor, had a multifamily office based in the Netherlands that he sold to UBS. And then he did a dissertation on what he calls enterprise families. So quite wealthy families who use philanthropy as a way of keeping their family together over multiple generations, that both kind of maintains their social status, their social position, but also helps create family cohesion and even potentially the family wealth as well. So he found that philanthropy can be a very interesting way of maintaining connections across generations, not only for philanthropy, but for kind of family cohesion and family relationships over longer periods of time. So there's a lot of interest in family dynamics. There's not as much research. There's a lot of consultants who provide services to families because a lot of wealthy families want to use philanthropy as a way to maintain family ties, because with that kind of wealth, people can disperse all over the world and start their own interests. But kind of getting people infected early with the notion of what are you going to do as a philanthropist, and what can we do together as philanthropists helps kind of build those family cohesions. And so a lot of consultants in the family wealth space and family offices provide that quasi-therapeutic consulting as well, but it also makes a difference in terms of what happens to philanthropic flows from the increasing wealth that we see generated in these family connections. So I hope that's helpful.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Duracell. I'm a senior here at Southern University. So, being that we are the future, what is some advice that you can give to upcoming students to get more involved in philanthropy, being that that is where the funds are?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Well, I think being here in the Valdry Center is a great beginning. What's your major? Great, wonderful. Well, communication is a big part of that. I think being curious and realizing that there are multiple ways of philanthropy is a wonderful beginning, and also realizing that often for your generation, philanthropy is kind of an old-fashioned and clunky word. I think the reason we keep using philanthropy is because it comes kind of from the same deep context as democracy and politics does, those words that are so important to who we are, and they were kind of first thrown out at us with the ancient Greeks. And and philanthropy is similar. That's one of the reason we use philanthropy, and there's a myth of the gift of fire coming from the Mount Olympus. That's why we use that. But I think in your generation, there's a lot of philanthropy that happens under the guise of other issues like social justice and social good. And people are, in your generation, seem to be, I didn't pause on that slide, but more skeptical of current organizations. They're much more focused on issues. So we've seen a lot of movements, everything from the pink hat movement after the election to Black Lives Matter, this kind of movement of philanthropy of people coming together. But it's not focused on organizations and institutions like we're in right now. So that's a really interesting phenomenon, and I'm not sure we understand it very well. How do these movements start that can change the world? The way our civil rights movement was kind of a grassroots, faith-based change that there were some big donors involved here and there, but they didn't drive the process. So I think there's so many different elements of possibility there. So I think I think my message would be there's a lot of possibility and opportunity to be involved civically in a time that is obviously um, is dangerous, it's fraught, our civic fabric is fraying. We want to support your generation the best we can because everything we've messed up has got to be fixed by you all. So I think beginning with curiosity and understanding the possibilities available there, realizing that there is the idea of you want to chase or find where the resources are in terms of big donors. But there's also an important trend among your generation that is questioning kind of the power that we're giving these big donors as well, right? And so that goes to the question of policy in terms of we've created a policy environment that kind of supports these very large donors. And even Warren Buffett says, you should tax me much more than you do. So I think it's really complex, and I think it can get kind of demoralizing, and you just want to burn everything down that's messed up. But I think the sense of possibility and following your curiosity and seeing that there is knowledge to be applied here to improve things is all for the best. So I think. I think it's a wonderful question, and I think we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I will not use this microphone. I think I can speak loud enough. My name is Sherman Ruth. I'm an executive PhD student here at Southern University. And we spoke earlier, but experiencing your presentation and looking at the drop off from baby boomers to college students that are here now. I remember one of the first questions in our program in my philanthropy class was, what's the difference between philanthropy and charity? And that spurred a big debate or whatnot. And understanding the intricacies of that debate, my question is, how do we get the youth engaged? We saw in your PowerPoint there was kind of a drop off and whatnot. And I look at my own self. When I graduated undergraduate school here at Southern University, it was about getting a job and getting out there, making some money to pay off student loans. And then when I went to Southern University Law Center, it was more so, like you said, you're meeting lifetime friends or whatnot. You have a family, you're just trying to better yourself or whatnot. Nothing about philanthropy ever came up. And not until I enrolled into the PhD program. I'm 52 years old. And I thought what I was doing was philanthropic, meaning giving through my fraternity organizations, community organizations, or whatnot. But I learned, and quite frankly, ashamed that, where I am now, I could have done more. And I'm thinking what I'm doing through my church and other organizations was philanthropic, but it was charitable or whatnot. So how do we get our youth now to understand the difference as they matriculate from that first level, second level, and potentially third level of higher education?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because often classes start between charity is, charity is basically, give a person a fish, or philanthropy is to teach a person how to fish. So, and philanthropy, when the first foundations came up, the Rockefeller Foundation being the first one, it was very controversial, actually. The Congress did not want to charter the Rockefeller Foundation. It was like, people were saying in Congress, what you're going to create this big mass of wealth that's unaccountable, and they're going to make decisions that are going to change. We're not going to do that. And then finally, they did get a charter from the state of New York. And then these foundations went and built kind of this systematic philanthropy that's very closely associated with the rise of social science in our country, and the way social science fed into the rise of public policy and a formal civil service that moved away from the old machine, kind of a clientelist way as well. So I think history is really important to understand kind of how did we get here. And there's not one history, there's not one way of telling the story, but telling a story that makes sense and sheds light on how is it that we got here in a way that is hopefully gives us some insight into why we are the way we are here. And great visionaries like Martin Luther King Jr. were able to do that, kind of tell a story that was, at the end of the day, inclusive of everybody, and tell them how you can all play a role in changing the world. So My sense is that, even though the initial instinct of a young person is not look to the past, that we need to all work together to create kind of empowering narratives of how it is that we got here and how are we going to go forward, and what role does each of us have that's empowering to be able to make things happen. I think one of the consequences of focusing on wealthy individuals, which we have to do when we're fundraising, because that's where the money is, and working creatively to help build the pipeline for new donors through new techniques of annual fund and alumni fundraising, is that it creates a sense of people that if they don't have the special position of being really wealthy, that their impact on our collective world is going to be very small. And so I see people kind of giving up. You see the celebrity culture also on our phones, and that's why this is way too general, but the mental health crisis that we have among our youth too, is there is a sense of despondency, because if you don't measure up to being the top of the heap, then there's something wrong with you as well. So I think by focusing too much on this super systematic philanthropy, which almost by definition has to happen by very wealthy, big pieces of money coming together, that if you're not part of that circle, you wonder, what difference can I make, and do you feel empowered? So I think continuing to encourage young people that they do have the power, and hopefully the power to change doesn't mean just burning everything down. That and it's hard to say in this kind of world where the emotions are so strong, and we're back to a situation where we have wars and authoritarians walking around the country. So I think it's hard, but I'm biased. I work at a university. I love universities. I think they're this is where possibility and thought comes from, and in my experience, this is where people have come up with positive, new, possible narratives. Is in university settings. Is that we need to empower more of our young people to find meaning, purpose, and possibility here, and that philanthropy is something that they all have. They don't have to be. You don't have to be in New York and working for the Ford Foundation to make a difference. So those are the things I think that are important. And I think the debate between charity and philanthropy is really generative, because it keeps asking you, as you're asking yourself, could I have been more systematic? Could I have been doing stuff better? And people are asking also about philanthropy, like Edgar de Villanueva, about decolonizing wealth. For systematic philanthropy, we've built all these kind of formal policy-like structures. What is your what is the return on investment? What system are you using to make sure that I know you're moving the needle, you're actually doing something positive in the world, you're not just being emotional in terms of giving your money, which is mere charity. He makes a good point, is that you kind of say some kinds of giving are more important, the kind that has more control, the kind that comes from bigger money, some that comes from wealth that was gotten by ill means, and it kind of downplays the grassroots and what communities really need and want. And do you actually listen to communities when you're kind of trying to be really super systematic up on high and decide what's good for everybody by yourself? So there's some interesting debate. So that's, I think, a really generative debate that I think allows people to think of alternatives, hopefully.
Thank you very much. We have two more questions. We want to be mindful of our time for everyone here. Um,
I'm with Carrie Lawson with LSU at Eunice. We're the 2-year kind of community college arm of the LSU system. And a trend that I'm seeing amongst kind of that Generation X age group is that I'm finding a lot more philanthropic opportunity with my first generation graduates rather than the second generation graduates. Is there research kind of out there amongst giving from first generation college graduates versus second generation? It's just an interesting trend.
Oh,
I think
that's
that I'm
interesting.
starting to see, and I think it's because the first generation, we provided them the access they would not have otherwise had, whereas more of the second generation is, I'm hypothesizing, but I think it's because they felt like it was more expected of them, and it was just, we were just a place to get to where they needed to go next.
Okay. So you see more generosity among the first generation students for whom they're the first people in their family to actually join?
Correct.
That's interesting. I'm not aware of any research on that as well. There's been some research that's kind of mixed about, are scholarship recipients more generous after they feel that they need to give back, and it's kind of inconclusive because it depends, I think, in what context they see that scholarship coming to them, and kind of how what kind of communications and narrative you wrap it into. Right?
Not all of mine were scholarship recipients. It was more about them having access and being the first.
It's more transformational for the first generation than the
Correct.
second generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And but the community college field is something that's been overly neglected, right? I think when you look at the mass of funding that goes to higher education, if you look at the top 100 universities in terms of who gets the most money, they get, almost 40% of all giving goes to 100 universities. We have 4,000 of them, most of them community colleges. We have a professional doctorate as well, and we have a community college president who's doing her dissertation, trying to figure out what can we do to change and bring more money to community colleges and have more people follow in Mackenzie Scott's kind of model, saying we need to give money where communities are empowering themselves at the grassroots level. So, but that great question.
It's smaller increments. They're not necessarily giving at the $1,000 level, but they're making it a point to contribute. And we're also seeing family gifts as well from some of those first generation siblings that attended.
That's terrific because they are community colleges. They're colleges of the community. Sometimes we see them as these are transactional kind of places where you get your skill and you leave. But the more there's a community there, I think the more you'll create the sense that I have to participate in continuing this going forward. Right. Well, that's a wonderful sign of success that we don't celebrate enough too. Right.
Okay, hi, I'm Arthur Jack.
Hi,
I live
Arthur.
in the Detroit, Michigan area, so
Okay.
I'm familiar with IUPUI. So I got two questions, but first I just want to understand relationships. So IUPUI, I know that's Indiana and Purdue and Indianapolis. So what's the relationship? Because I saw Indiana University, but when I see the acronym IUPUI, I say, okay, that's a nap time, as we say. Can you explain that relationship?
How many hours do we have? So
Yeah,
no, it's very simple actually. It was an experiment to do a joint venture between Indiana and Purdue University
Okay.
for 50 years that is coming to an end.
Oh.
Beginning in August of 2024, we will be Indiana University, Indianapolis. So you can forget about the P and all that. So,
Okay. I thought Purdue was somewhere.
Yeah, Purdue was part of the experiment. We're going our separate ways. We'll be all kind of virtually next to each other. It's a good development, but we've always been part of Indiana University, and now it'll be Indiana University, Indianapolis. So.
Okay. Now I get to the question.
Okay.
So as you're talking about giving, so I just give an example. I grew up down here, and when my first experience of giving was in church. At the beginning of Old Baptist Church down here, they play the music. You walk around the front, you put the money in the collection plate. I used to enjoy those coins hitting that plate. Don't give me $1. I want to get the coins.
Yeah.
Use the coins to do it. So that's some insight in terms of giving. So in your research aspect, everything, if I had to summarize it, is looking at the person's achievement, accomplishment, and how they give. But the example I just gave you is more of the human center, like human-centered design. Do you have a team looking at that in terms of how do we reach the individual versus the class of individuals that give?
We do. I'll mention two separate entities. So first of all, we have a Lake Institute on Faith and Giving. That is a whole institute that looks at the intersection between faith and giving, looking at congregational giving. Where is it going? What are congregations doing in this environment where membership is usually going down? To counter that, what are they doing to talk about money in different ways beyond passing the plate, that can help them raise funds and be consistent with their faith-based mission, talking about money in a faith-based way. So we have the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving, and what they also do is they do training for congregations. They do professional development training for congregations to figure out how they're fundraise. And the way we try to translate some of this research into reaching donors is something that we talked to some of your Southern's academic leaders yesterday, is we do professional development for training fundraisers. We have something that's called the Fundraising School that's been around for almost 50 years now that trains fundraisers to how do you understand the context, but also individual motivations to become a relationship-based fundraiser as well, always trying to be informed by research and instilling the joy of giving. You know, we were one of the very first training programs for fundraisers, started by a fellow called Hank Rosso, who wanted to instill a new profession that was based on ethics, and it was based on spreading the joy of giving rather than being an extension of salesmanship, which he said was, this is really not appropriate to fundraising. It's always mission first. It's always having a duty to the public space.
Well, let's give Amir another round of applause here. Go anywhere.
Okay.
I didn't mention this in my opening remarks. Amir is a friend. He is also a member of the advisory board for the Valdry Center. We thought it was very important that we brought to the table experts in the field of philanthropy, and he has been a master connector for us with individuals and resources that would help to expand our programming model. So we just have a small token of our appreciation for you joining us here today. That is a sign remark painting, right, from Terrence Osborne, a local artist in New Orleans who has now received world fame, and that is of Scotts Bluff, where you visited this morning. And so that is number 68 of only 200.
Wow.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Well, thank you. This is a privilege. Thank you so much, Al. That's great. Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us. So we're going to have some refreshments, am I right? Next door? Okay. So we're all done, and you're welcome to stay and ask Amir any more questions you may have. I know you have a flight pretty soon, right?
Right.
Okay. So he's probably got another 30 minutes that he's going to hang around with us, but we're glad to have him here and as a part of our team. Thanks a lot, my friend.
Thank you, Al, my friend. And if you all want to reach out to me separately, feel free to do that. So.
And we're also going to distribute this. This was recorded today, and so if you'd like to see it again and circulate it to your friends, colleagues, we'll send this to you as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Al. And thank you to all that are here in attendance and those who joined us online, Facebook Live and YouTube Live, so that you can review the recording. You can see some of the PowerPoint presentation slides that were presented. We need an evaluation, right? In order for us to continue to invite key speakers such as Dr. Amir Pasic, Dr. Harry Williams, we need your support in telling us how we did today, as well as who you all may want to see in the future. How did I do preparing and bringing you all into this space? But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the Valdry Center for Philanthropy. Just briefly, the graduates in 1950s, Leon Valdry and Warren Valdry, supported this initiative to have this structure built for us to provide programs and services not only to students to attend Southern University and A&M college campuses, but also to learn about giving. So today, thank you all for being in attendance. You'll see on the seats the products and the recipients of some of the funding support that was received from all of you donors that are here and present and online. Please, please share this video opportunity with others and give back as well. So those who are here in attendance, feel free to take one of the brochures. Your name may be in it because we do like to show our support and gratitude by printing your names as well in our brochure. So thank you all again for being here. We appreciate it. And as Mr. Harrell said, we do have some light refreshments across the hall for those who are in attendance. And those who are online, next time we hope to see you here at the Volger Center for Philanthropy on the campus of Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Have a great day. Goodbye.